Sam LaPorta, Travis Kelce, and Mark Andrews rightfully sit atop our tight end rankings, but I also think that Trey McBride should be a part of this group while Vinnie disagrees. We go tier by tier and explain our tight end rankings for the 2024 season on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
If you're anything like me, I have 3 drafts this weekend. So this is a huge weekend for fantasy football drafts. The season is less than 2 weeks away. We have gone through our positional rankings this entire week. We hit on quarterbacks on Monday, running backs on Tuesday, wide receivers on Wednesday and Thursday's show. And today we're going to finish off the week with our tight end rankings. Before we get into that, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Let's hop right into these tight end rankings because tight ends this year are more exciting than they have been in a very, very long time. It is crazy, but yes, we have Sam. It's not crazy because everyone has him, but Sam LaPorta is sitting at the top of our tight end rankings. What I find crazy about this is that he's a second-year tight end, right? And what he did as a rookie was insane. But you have a tier 1, so your top tier of tight ends that you think will all be top scorers this year are Sam LaPorta at number 1, Travis Kelce at 2, Mark Andrews at 3. Now, I also have the same 3, but I have LaPorta at 1, Mark Andrews at 2, and Travis Kelce at 3. Let's just talk about Sam LaPorta for a quick second. Why are we putting him tight end 1? Do you want to explain that to everybody?
Yeah, I mean, he finished as the average scoring tight end 1 ahead of Travis Kelce last year in half-point PPR, just ahead, I'll say 0.3 or so points ahead, but he still was number 1 in that production. And you look at the Lions offense, it's the same. Wide receivers a question mark behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jared Goff still loves throwing the tight end. Ben Johnson is still there calling the plays. LaPorta is the second target on this team after Amon-Ra St. Brown. So a lot of it is going to go through the middle of the field. St. Brown in the slot. You got him at the inside there, as well as the short and intermediate routes that are going to go to LaPorta. He's a big part of their offense. He's good in the red zone. He scored despite some multiple tight ends getting some usage here in this offense. So Sam LaPorta, there's nothing that says he's going to have a down year in year 2.
Yeah, the only thing I might be worried about is like 10 receiving touchdowns doesn't seem extremely repeatable. Like that's going to be a hard thing to repeat, but he's going to be so heavily involved in a really good offense. So Sam LaPorta seems safe. I'm willing to pay up the price that he costs this year. Now I have Andrews over Kelce. You have Kelce over Andrews. The reason why I like Andrews over Kelce is because he's younger, right? Kelce's 35 or, will be 35. He's getting up there, real up there in age. He already scored the most points by any tight end that's 34 years or older in points per game last year. So that obviously Kelce could do it again at 35. But with Andrews last year, if you just take away his game that he got hurt, he played 7 snaps in that game. If you take that away, he averaged 12.2 points per game last year in half PPR. That's more than Sam LaPorta, who was the tight end 1 in points per game. So we've seen Andrews be the tight end 3 in points per game in 2022, tight end 1 in 2021. Like he's been highly consistent when he's healthy and on the field. So, I mean, I'm not going to just predict he's going to get injured this year. I'm going to say hopefully he can stay healthy. And that's why he's my tight end 2 over Kelce. Why do you feel better about Kelce over Andrews?
Yeah, it's very close. I mean, when you look overall, when you do factor in that game for Andrews, it was very negligible. It was really close between Sam LaPorta, Travis Kelce. You throw in TJ Hawkinson, who we cannot put in this mix because he's hurt to start the season. And then Mark Andrews in terms of the average scoring in half-point PPR. So very, very close here. I think it's just a preference. It's probably because I've had Kelce on a lot of winning teams that I feel great about him, having him number 2. Maybe the durability comes into a little bit of a factor. But, yeah, however you look at it, I mean, I think you could even go crazy and do this in different order. You could have Andrews, Kelce, LaPorta. You could have Kelce, LaPorta, Andrews. You could have any combination here. And that's why it's the tier one, because I can't tell you exactly who's going to score the most out of this group. You also could have, let's say, that you have a consistency out of Sam LaPorta week in and week out with his catches and receptions, but maybe Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce are bigger game potential, right? If they can blow up for 2 touchdowns and do that for their elite quarterbacks here. But yeah, they're all in great shape. So I would really, based on where the tight ends are going, really try my best to land one of these guys and then not worry about the rest of the board here.
Yeah, I think this year going early on a tight end instead of a quarterback. Like some years you're like, okay, I just want to pay up for a quarterback because there's like Josh Allen in the past few years. He's been such a difference maker at quarterback. But now that you have those worries about him losing his playmakers and other worries about quarterbacks, like I'm down to just wait on a quarterback, but that means you're able to pay up for a tight end because it's really hard to pay up for both a quarterback and a tight end, right? But if you're going to wait on a quarterback, I want to pay up for a tight end to have that difference maker in my position where I don't have to worry about streaming tight ends because that gets really tricky, right? Now, I have Trey McBride in my tier one. I think he's right with these guys. I think he can do it. Last year with Kyler Murray from weeks 10 through 18. He was the tight end 5 in points per game, and he only scored 2 touchdowns during that span. Like, yeah, maybe his targets go down a little bit because of Marvin Harrison Jr., but also at the same time, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to take over those wide receiver targets. That like Hollywood Brown is gone, Rondell Moore is gone, and whatever targets that Greg Dortch was getting, like those are like I just think those are what the targets Marvin Harrison's going to get. So Trey McBride, I still think is easily the second target in this offense. And Marvin Harrison should make this offense better. So that will allow more scoring opportunities for Trey McBride. I don't see him only scoring 2 receiving touchdowns again for a full half of a season. And he only scored 3 all year long. So that's why I like him at tier 1. Now you're really down on him. You have him at tight end 7 at the bottom of your tier 2, not even at the top. So why are you so down on Trey McBride compared to where I have him?
Well, I'm actually above where he finished last year because he was tied for tight end 9 in average scoring. So I have him actually a few spots above. I'm not sure he's going to have the same touchdown upside. I think he's a little bit different style of tight end. We'll see where it goes. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. just worries me a little bit in terms of I think Kyler Murray is going to just light up his eyes for Marvin Harrison Jr. all over the field. And keep in mind, I know that they lost all those targets at wide receiver, but they also didn't have anybody at wide receiver to dominate these targets. And now they have Harrison to do that. And I think they'll be a little bit more diversified in their offense than they were last year. But I think Harrison will be the alpha versus McBride out of default. So I think I just drop him to like a normal top tight end status at tight end 7. I mean, I'm a little bit behind these guys because of that reason. I don't think he's going to be the alpha. When you look at these other guys, LaPorta, Kelce, and Andrews, they're still the alpha on their teams or co-alphas, right? At the very least, LaPorta with Amon-Ra and Andrews with Zay Flowers. But here in this situation, I think Marvin Harrison, the presence again of him kind of changes things. But again, I still have him factored up a few spots from where he finished last year. And he could end up scoring more. I think more guys could also rise to the occasion and put up some numbers here that I just like with a little bit more upside.
Yeah, you do have 2 guys rising above him in Dalton Kincaid and Kyle Pitts, who we're going to talk about in our next segment because they're both in our tier 2. You have 4 tight ends in your tier 2 with George Kittle, Kincaid, Pitts, and the McBride at the bottom. I have 3 with Pitts, Kincaid, and Kittle. We will discuss our tier 2 tight ends in our next segment. Comparison is the thief of joy. It's easy to envy others people's lives. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have so you can start living your best life. I have personally benefited from online therapy greatly over the past few years, and BetterHelp has been a great sponsor to us. And I'll just say, like, if you're thinking about doing online therapy, the ways it's helped me with my anxiety, my irritability. It's taught me positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It really has just empowered me to be the best version of myself. I can't imagine not doing it. Like every time I'm able to get in an appointment on online therapy, I just feel so much better afterwards. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you don't have to stress because you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So in our tier 2, as I mentioned, we both have Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid, and George Kittle. Now, you also have Trey McBride. Well, I have him in tier 1. Now, you have Kittle right at the top of your tier 2 at tight end 4. I have him at the bottom of my tier 2 at tight end 7. I think he's a little too inconsistent, right? Last year, he did finish tight end 5 in points per game, but he's either like tight end 1 on the week or tight end 50 because Kyle Shanahan either decides to utilize him like no other in one given week and then completely just use him as a blocker the next one and get him no targets. So that's why I have him a little bit lower. I'm sure he'll finish as a top 5 tight end like he always does. I just don't like having him on my roster because of the inconsistency.
Yeah, I think one thing that has kind of unlocked George Kittle a little bit more for those big plays and big games is Brock Purdy. It's good chemistry with him downfield, and they just connect in a lot of big games. But it's very hard. And we said this, if you're drafting Deebo Samuel, if you're drafting Brandon Ayuk, you're drafting George Kittle, you can expect these on and off weeks. That's just going to be the nature. This offense is too good, right? And Kyle Shanahan's a little bit different. Like Chris McCaffrey's the bread and butter. Everyone else, what's the best matchup this week? He's going to the lab and saying, okay, this is a George Kittle week. We're going to have him stretch the field. No one's going to cover him in the middle. He's going to have a big game. No one can touch him in the red zone. We're going to go there. But I think he's got a pretty high floor now, even though his ceiling is also pretty massive in any given week. He has a high floor in terms of what his final finish is going to be, right? Because of Purdy. I think it's improved a lot more. I think with Jimmy Garoppolo was okay, but with Purdy, it's been on point here. He's using Kittle in the right way. So I think in a weird way, I think he has a high ceiling in a given week, but a high floor when you look overall at the big picture. You're setting and forget it. Maybe the bottom line is he's a little bit better in terms of a best ball tight end than a weekly tight end.
Oh, yeah. He would be amazing at a best ball setup where you don't have to set your lineup. You just get the top scores that week if they're on your roster. So, yes, I agree with you there. Now, Dalton Kincaid, you have him as your tight end 5. I have him at tight end 6. Behind Kyle Pitts, you have Kincaid one spot ahead of Pitts. With Kincaid, I will say he is all projection, right? He's a guy I'm willing to take a risk on, but it is all projection. We are just projecting that Kincaid is going to be the focal point of this Bills offense with Diggs and Gabe Davis gone. And maybe that's just a narrative that us fantasy managers just really want to happen, right? But we don't know if that's the Bills' actual plan or if it's their plan to just spread the ball out. He had a solid rookie season, but he scored just 2 touchdowns, finished as a tight end 11. Dawson Knox is still there to take some snaps away. He could be a thorn on his side. Again, I like Kincaid. That's why I'm at tight end 6. I'm willing to take the risk and pay up for him. But it really is a huge risk in all projection from us fantasy people that just hope this is how the Bills plan to utilize him.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of hype for Dalton Kincaid. There's plenty of hope for Kyle Pitts, but you can also cross them over, right? I think there's hope for Dalton Kincaid to say, all right, come on. He's right there. He's a first-round pick. He's got a lot of talent, but maybe we should be hyping up Kyle Pitts a little bit more because, hey, he's a first-round pick. He did have a 1,000-yard season as a rookie. He knows he can be a lot more involved in an actual legitimate passing game this year. We know there's no question without Dalton Kincaid. He's got Josh Allen, and quite frankly, the Bills' wide receivers have been looking underwhelming so far. Keon Coleman and a lot here. So Kincaid's going to have to be a key part of their offense. A lot of 2 tight end sets, probably with Dawson Knox on the field. And look at Kyle Pitts. I mean, he's got to be at worst the second target on the team, maybe in the first, right? With his ability to get open, short to intermediate, maybe use him as a default slot. They really don't have an option there. Darnell Mooney's going to be the field stretcher outside Drake. London is going to be kind of the default big number 1 that you would put on the outside. So they don't really have, again, consistent slot play there. So that could really help Kyle Pitts. And that's really what he is. And I think that's what Kincaid is too. If you use these guys as inside targets, use them a lot like Travis Kelce, move them around, get them open, they could have big years. Now, I think it's just a preference. Pitts or Kincaid, we like them a little bit differently, but it would not surprise me, by the way, if Pitts or Kincaid finishes get ready for it as the tight end one on the board. I would not be surprised, and that's why I like them, because they have that kind of upside.
I definitely wouldn't be surprised if Kyle Pitts does. It's just still a shocker to me that he's still only 23 years old. This kid is still so young. He's a full year younger than Dalton Kincaid, and Kincaid's been in the league for only 1 year. So that's just crazy. But the whole thing with Pitts is you expect his targets to be 100 times better than what they were. He had 65.5% of catchable targets since 2022, by far the lowest among tight ends in that span. He still got targets. Like, he got 90 targets last year. That was second on the team. Drake London had 110. They just didn't pass all that much. We expect this to be a much heavier pass offense this year. I always liked Kyle Pitts' talent. I hated his situation. Now I like his situation. I like his talent. And that's why I'm willing to get back on the Kyle Pitts train and have him at tight end 5. Now, going into our tier 3 tight ends, we both have Jake Ferguson right at the top of our tier 3s. I did consider putting him into tier 2. I will say that. He's our tight end 8 for both of us. I really like the upside of Jake Ferguson this year. He finished as a tight end 9 in fantasy points last season. That was his first season as a starter in the NFL. He's entering his 3rd season in the NFL. So he's also still like just getting going. He was second on the team in receptions and receiving yards. I fully expect that again. But what I do expect is that he's going to score more touchdowns. He only scored 5 touchdowns last year, despite being top 5 in the NFL in both red zone targets and targets inside opponents' 5-yard lines among all positions. Like, when you're looking at the most red zone targets, it's all wide receivers and then also Jake Ferguson. So it goes CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, Tyreek Hill, Jake Ferguson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and DK Metcalf. All of those wide receivers scored over 8 receiving touchdowns, or 8 or more receiving touchdowns, while Jake Ferguson was stuck at 5. I think Ferguson has a really high ceiling this year.
Yeah, the touchdowns definitely can boost you quickly. We know that in any position, but especially at tight end, if you get the red zone usage, because you're not going to get the volume that the wide receivers might get elsewhere to put up those numbers. Yeah, that position has been pretty money, right? The tight end for Dak Prescott in key situations. It just basically transitioned from Dalton Schultz to Jake Ferguson. Now, one guy that I have to put him here almost by default, and you have exactly where I have that, Evan Ingram at 9. Now, this shows you that first-round picks, eventually, if they get in the right situation, are going to produce big time. I just think Evan Ingram cannot expect that same type of season. It's been adjusted in the market there because, again, we know Christian Kirk's going to be healthy. They have some other weapons that could be eating into his time. But really what helps Evan Ingram is there are a lot of question marks after Evan Ingram, including TJ Hawkinson and that knee injury recovery. So I don't think you can put him any lower because he's really started to run out of reliable options.
Yeah, that's exactly my thought here. Tight end 2 overall last year, but it's so skewed from the last 6 games of the season, weeks 13 through 18, when Christian Kirk wasn't there. That's when he exploded. That's when he was averaging 15 fantasy points per game from weeks 1 through 12 with Christian Kirk on the field. He was averaging 7.5 fantasy points per game. They both play in the slot. That's the issue, right? So they're kind of competing against each other with those slot snaps. But when Christian Kirk is healthy, they want a wide receiver in the slot, and then Ingram's going to play the more typical tight end role. So that's just going to hurt him a little bit, but he should still be heavily targeted. He is what he is. Tight end 9, right? I'm not really looking for him in drafts, but I think that's a fine ranking for him. Now, I was shocked by this. You have TJ Hawkinson as your tight end 10. I have him much lower because I don't know what to expect from this injury, him coming back from this knee injury. Also with Sam Darnold as the starter, like, gross. I can't put him as a top 10 tight end, but why do you feel confident about that?
Yeah, to me, I think Hawkinson just has that upside. I mean, I just mentioned where he finished in scoring, right up there with the 5. He was the 3rd tight end in average scoring last year. He made a nice transition in the NFC North from the Lions to the Vikings. And one thing about Sam Darnold, I think this hurts the value of Jordan Addison, right? Sam Darnold, these limited quarterbacks, especially the veterans, we've seen it, they're going to target their main dudes a lot. And when Hawkinson comes back, and whenever that is, I think he'll step in immediately, do a key role here. And look, I'm going to project something, Michelle. Nick Mullins is going to make starts at some point for the Vikings. It's going to happen. And actually, that's not the worst thing because he puts the ball in the hands of playmakers here. So We know that he fed the tight ends well in San Francisco back in the day. So this guy, Hawkinson, is just too talented, right? Like, given the state of tight end, and we just talked about Evan Ingram being the last really confident guy, I think that's why I have Hawkinson high. Is like, take Hawkinson here, it's fine, and then go get a guy that you can stream, or multiple guys you can stream based on the matchups. But Hawkinson just has too much upside to have him drop, especially when there's a considerable question mark drop off after you get to that Ferguson Ingram point.
Yeah, if he can get out there healthy enough, I'm sure he'll finish his top 10. He's a really talented player, but how slowly does he come along? How much do they really push him? And Sam Darnold, gross. Like, the only guy I want to take a chance on is Justin Jefferson in that offense and be like, he can overcome Sam Darnold. I don't know about everyone else. Now, in our final segment, we're going to get into my tight end 10, which is David Njoku. You have a bit lower. You have guys like Hawkinson, who we just talked about, Pat Freiermuth, and Brock Bowers all over David Njoku. So we will hit on that to close out our Friday show.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find qualified professionals with high quality that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Well, for NFL teams, they got the training camp sessions, the practices, and preseason games to figure out who should be on their team and how they want to have them work towards success. That's what LinkedIn is going to do for you. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role in a new organization. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional only on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process much faster. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Why aren't you one of them? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, let's talk about David Njoku. One of these other kind of, he was in the first round of the NFL draft. Took him a while to produce in fantasy. He did it, really exploded down the stretch with Joe Flacco at quarterback. So I just have never been high on David Njoku. Like, I think he's an okay producer. He kind of produces in spikes. So that's kind of why I'm down on him here. And I'd rather much have the stash of Hawkinson than put Njoku there. I have him down at 13.
Yeah, it's not like I'm excited to draft David Njoku. I have him at tight end 10. He finished at tight end 7 in points per game last year, tight end 9 in 2022. So he has been a top 10 tight end the last 2 years. Yes, last year he was a top 10 tight end because of that massive ending with Joe Flacco. But I still think in this offense, he's going to be the second target on the Browns. I'm not worried about Jerry Jeudy. I just don't think he's very talented. And then Elijah Moore. So I do think Njoku's going to be the second target. He's going to get end zone targets. And he's been talked up all offseason in Browns camp. It seems like he's still being utilized in that way he was at the end of last year. Maybe that's what they need to see, right? Like, when they use him, what he can do. That's why I have him at tight end 10. Now we already talked about Hawkinson over him. You also have Pat Freiermuth and Brock Bowers over David Njoku. So you have Freiermuth at 11, Brock Bowers at 12. I also have Brock Bowers at 12, a little bit lower on Freiermuth at tight end 14. The reason I don't really like Freiermuth is because he's never done anything for fantasy, right? He was the tight end 27 last year in points per game, tight end 13 in 2022, tight end 15 in 2021. This Steelers offense is looking atrocious yet again. Like, I don't really want to take a chance on Pat Freiermuth this year.
Yeah, the only reason I really like him here is, again, we talked about how Jonnu Smith produced quite a bit there in this Arthur Smith offense with Kyle Pitts. If you smash their numbers together, they weren't too bad. And I think the one thing is Pat Freiermuth was taken off the field quite a bit last season, where he's playing about half the snaps based on what they were using. And that's kind of criminal, right? He's a very good guy that can block and slide out of being in line and make some catches and make some damage in the red zone. I think that's going to change a little bit. Arthur Smith loves him, the 12 personnel. So we know Freiermuth is going to be on the field quite a bit, and that would be at an expense of a slot receiver, right? They really are struggling for targets behind George Pickens that they can trust here. Pickens is the field stretcher, but you need a short to intermediate guy. We'll see if Roman Wilson at some point can establish himself as a slot. But Freiermuth, I think, could get the cheapy route of touchdowns. And I think the Steelers will score touchdowns at a little bit better rate this year, not expecting an offensive explosion from the Steelers, but I think that's just a better opportunity here because they'll be on the field and running routes, and that always is a better formula for fantasy points if you're on the field getting the ball. And I think Freiermuth is going to get it, and I could see him score 6 to 7 cheap touchdowns here and put up some decent catch totals. Again, we're not banging the table for him crazily here. He's still down here, and again, this is just a situation at tight end where you're just trying to find the best values after the top half.
And that's what, so that's why we have Brock Bowers at tight end 12, right? Because we know how talented he is coming in, but rookie tight ends are very, very hard to trust. Like Sam LaPorta's don't ever come around, right? He was a historical season from him last year, and that's what you're going to need. If you're taking a Brock Bowers, we have very rarely seen tight ends as rookies be good for fantasy. Now he's very, very talented. And he could do it, but he's also playing with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, so not many touchdowns to go around. And Devontae Adams steals a ton of touchdowns, right? So also Jacoby Myers is going to get his targets. I don't see a huge rookie season from Brock Bowers unless he happens to put up 10 touchdowns this year.
Yeah, part of it is people were excited about what Sam LaPorta did as a rookie last year. Bowers comes in with immense talent here, the way that Pitts and Kincaid did as kind of athletic receivers that were worthy of the first round. And he was great at Georgia. I mean, he was a fantastic receiver, but he's a little bit hurt to start the season. That could also curb his upside. I think Bowers is a guy that he could be the second half guy. Like in the first half, he might start a little slowly, but then in the second half, you could see him really having an imprint on this offense. But you better have another good guy with Bowers because of the injury issue and the rookie uncertainty there. Now, Taysom Hill, look, we both have him way above market. You have him way above market at tight end 11. I get it. I mean, I understand this. I mean, I have him at tight end 18, so I'm still pretty high on him in relation to where people have him. He was, by the way, tight end 12 last year. So he was a tight end 1 in average scoring when he put all together his usage and rushing and catching and red zone and all whatever he was used in. And we just had Dennis Allen kind of have a recent interview where he said Taysom Hill can do everything. They would put him everywhere if they could. So they're going to make him earn his money, especially with Derek Carr stinking. And really, the backup backs to Alvin Kamara haven't done a lot either.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Taysom Hill should probably be even ranked higher than tight end 11. Like I would rather have him than draft David Njoku or Evan Ingram earlier. He played limited snaps last year from early on in the season. I think that's the only reason he finished so low at tight end 12. His snaps started to go up in week 6, but in the 10 games he played 25 plus snaps last year, he averaged 10.9 points per game and half PPR. That was the same amount of points, actually a little bit more, than George Kittle averaged last year. He was a tight end 7 in points per game in 2022, tight end 6 in 2021, tight end 5 in 2020. Now he had some quarterback starts in there, but he might play some quarterback this year. We don't know. He's going to get goal line work because the backups behind Alvin Kamara is not doing anything. Kendre Miller's injured. Like he's going to get goal line work. He's going to be used in short yardage situations. He's going to be used everywhere. He's going to be a top 10 fantasy tight end again.
Yeah, he's a fantasy dream and fantasy nightmare because you don't know exactly when to play him. But if you don't play him, that's when he'll do something and then all that. But he's definitely one of the most unique fantasy football cases really of all time. Like then the whole question about his eligibility, if he's lining up in the backfield and wildcat, is he a quarterback? Is he a running back? Is he really anything to do with tight end, but just put there for our purposes in fantasy? So Taysom Hill, he's going to continue to frustrate and pleasantly surprise fantasy managers here in 2024. Now, there's one guy I totally just didn't want to put anywhere, but you have him there at tight end 18. Now, we're getting into deep sleepers, and we can do that here because, again, you got to mine for these guys late. So you have Greg Dulcich at tight end 18. I thought about him a little bit higher, but then I saw Bo Nix being a little confident and being kind of in tune with 3 of his wide receivers. So that's why I was a little bit out on Greg Dulcich here.
Yeah, I still think Greg Dulcich could be the second target in the Broncos offense. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. Can a tight end be a top three target in his offense? We haven't got to see much of him. He's been hurt pretty much his entire career. He was a 3rd-round pick in 2022. He showed a lot of promise as a rookie through a 10-game span, because that's all he played as a rookie. He put up 411 yards, 55 targets in his rookie season. He was 5th in targeted air yards that rookie season, 10th in receiving yards. I think he showed promise. He's getting a lot of hype out of camp that they're going to utilize him. It's all just projection. Like, this is not a guy I want to rely on at all. It's a guy I'm keeping my eye on. Now, you have Cade Otton inside your top 20. This is a guy you're keeping an eye on. He's entering his 3rd season, I believe. I have zero desire in him because he does nothing and he stinks, but you like him.
Yeah, he's basically a guy that you can just throw out at the end of your draft. I mean, he was tight end 22 last year. I think that goes up a little bit with the usage. By the way, I did look up the stat. This was interesting as I was writing something for Sporting News. Liam Cohn, I know this was the year that Cooper Kupp was hurt, but Tyler Higbee led the Rams in targets. The 1 year that Liam Cohn was their offense coordinator, and he did work with Baker Mayfield at the tail end of it. So we'll see. I'm not saying he needs a Mike Evans injury, but maybe Chris Godwin fades a little bit, right? And Otton has to see a bit of a bigger role here. So that's my one deep sleeper. I'll mention one more guy that I have, and you can end on your very other deep sleeper. I have Mike Gesicki on my list, and this could be a cheapy 8 to 10 touchdown guy. I think there's some great reports about him and Joe Burrow. The slot, we'll see. We'll see if Andre Ayusavas can hold up, right? He's a little dude, and he's trying to replace Tyler Boyd. They're going to need someone in the middle field to catch him touchdowns. And Mike Gesicki, again, he does that a lot, and he's going to be very frustrating. He could be the cheap version of Eric Ebron with the Colts from a few years ago.
Yeah, I think Mike Gesicki is interesting. It's the same thing with Jonnu Smith, right? You're talking about these tight ends and these good offenses with only 2 real threats at the receiver and really nobody else. And with the way Waddle gets hurt all the time with the Dolphins, now the Dolphins had nobody at tight end for the last couple of years here. I do think Jonnu Smith could be involved. Again, not someone I'm super pumped to get, but someone you can keep an eye on. If you're in a 2 tight end league, or just you need to stream the position because you went with a tight end late, or a tight end that's stinking it up, I think he's a guy we'll be streaming throughout the year. That is it for our tight end rankings. That's it for our positional rankings. It's time to get drafting, and we're going to do some mock drafts next week for sure. Talk strategy. We're getting so close to the season. I hope you all have a great weekend. Bye, y'all.